Welcome back. I'm Peter St. Onge. This is a weekly roundup of my daily videos on the economy and freedom, where I cut through the BS and lay out what the gaslighting clowns pulled out of their hats this week and what is coming next. Just what kind of economy are they handing to Donald Trump? Now that the election is over, Joe Biden's minions are letting the terrifying economic data out of his statistical GIMP box. Last week, the Philly Fed flagged yet another massive jobs revision, estimating in a new study that jobs actually fell in Q2 of this year, so that's April to June. That contrasts with official numbers claiming 653,000 jobs were created in those very same 3 months. In other words, we could be looking at another massive revision, possibly 700,000 in fake jobs, brought to you by the finest statisticians government money can buy. Note, this is on top of the BLS revision last August that erased 818,000 imaginary jobs between March of 23 and March of this year. That revision wiped out 115,000 imaginary manufacturing jobs, 129,000 in retail, 150,000 in restaurants and hotels, and 358,000 professional jobs. In fact, just about the only category that was not revised down was government workers. Put it together and we could be looking at 1.5 million imaginary jobs magicked away. Note, that's not including the past 6 months, which could bring it to well over 2 million. Now, I'm old enough to remember when you were crazy for questioning government statistics. Now you are crazy not to question them. None of this should be surprising to anybody who's been paying attention to what's actually been happening. I've mentioned how pre-election a majority of voters said we're already in recession, which is striking when official statistics say we're galloping at 3% GDP growth and 4.2% unemployment. Striking enough, in fact, for endless lectures from mainstream media trying to gaslight voters into a Kamala presidency. As the official numbers come clean, it is looking dire on the ground. Continuing unemployment claims just hit a 3-year high, so almost back to COVID. Manufacturing is on a 2-year downtrend despite hundreds of billions in federal handouts flushed out to so-called green industries and famously cyclical semiconductors. Total job openings in the economy is the lowest since COVID. In fact, job openings are down nearly 4.5 million since March of 2022. Meanwhile, a recent CNBC poll found Americans are spending less this Christmas by a margin of 2-1. Bank of America finds almost a third of Americans spend, quote, more than 95% of their disposable income on necessities like housing, groceries, and utilities. A Lending Tree survey found that a quarter of Americans were unable to pay the power bill at some point in the past year, while a third of Americans had to cut spending on necessities in the past year. Finally, NBC reports that food banks are facing, quote, record levels of need. So much for that miracle economy. It looked good on paper. So what's next? When Donald Trump takes office come January 20th, you can be guaranteed the legacy media will pretend none of these problems existed until Trump showed up. They're already chomping at the bit. A few days ago, New Republic ran an article called, quote, we're already seeing signs that Trump is tanking the economy. Of course, he's not in office yet. There will be much more to come. Spending cuts are coming to Washington whether they like it or not. While Congress hides behind their desks praying the American people let them keep all the trillions they've shanghaied, betting markets are warming to the idea that the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, could actually cut government spending. This would be a big deal because there have been many attempts to rein in federal spending going back decades. Ronald Reagan tried across the board, including the Graham-Hollings Act of 1985 that tried automatic cuts, the Budget Enforcement Act of 1990 that tried spending caps, the GPRA of 93 that tried performance goals, then the Budget Control Act of 2011 that combined caps and automatic cuts. Every one failed spectacularly, swallowed by the bureaucratic Borg and spat out as subcommittees of subcommittees where good ideas go to die, and every budget mechanism is gamed into parity. For perspective, the federal budget during that period, so in 1980 it was just $877 billion, that's $3.2 trillion adjusted for inflation. Today, after a half-dozen-plus major reforms, the CBO projects the budget at $7.5 trillion, so over double. So that is what Elon, Vivek, and DOGE are up against. Thing is, betting markets are actually coming around to the possibility that, yes, this time is different. So betting site Kalshi has 35% odds of at least $250 billion annual cuts, 19% odds of $500 billion, and 11% odds of more than $1 trillion in cuts. Meanwhile, Kalshi's got 67% odds of at least 50,000 federal workers laid off, 51% of more than 100,000, 34% of more than 250,000 federal workers unleashed to go pick the fruit, the illegals left behind. And in case you dare to dream, Kalshi's running 12% odds, 1 in 8, that we can get rid of a cool 1 million federal workers. 1 million tiny trolls pulled from the bowed backs of the American people and cast out into the sunshine. Now, why should you care about betting odds? Because there's a ton of research that betting markets are better than pundits. They're better than experts. They're pretty much the best predictor of reality, for the simple reason that punters' money is at stake. They have an incentive to get it right. And gloriously, the dumb ones lose money and stop making predictions because they don't have any more money. So what is different this time? In short, we've got the most outside-the-box president since Teddy Roosevelt, and one with even bigger balls. Got a dream team that even Reagan didn't have, a team made of brilliant, passionate, deep-pocketed people who are not doing this for career points. They're doing it because they actually want to fix the country. Finally, as I mentioned the other day, past efforts to shrink Washington have run into the deadly shoals of gaslighting by a left-wing media. They stood ready to cast the very first dollar cut from a federal budget as starving school lunches and feeding grandma cat food. Those days are over. Media is the closest to a fair fight since Woodrow Wilson started government censorship. So unlike 1980 or even 2011, we can finally make our case for smaller government. So what's next? We could be on the edge of the biggest political transformation since the New Deal. Voters want it, we've got the team to do it, and it's going to be a heck of a ride. A word from our lead sponsor, Unchained.com. The holidays are coming. It's time to think about your annual IRA contributions. And the IRA is an investment vehicle that can save you a lot of taxes. And with Unchained, you can hold real Bitcoin in your IRA, get access to trading, inheritance, and loans. And it's the only company where you hold the keys and can verify that your Bitcoin is not being relent like banks do. We've seen futures-based ETFs underperform holding your own Bitcoin, so why settle for less? Book a friendly consultation at unchained.com/IRA. If you own gold, you're probably very happy with prices hitting all-time highs. But your gold can do more. It can generate passive income for you. With monetary metals, you earn up to 5% interest on your gold and silver paid in more ounces. Accredited investors can earn double-digit returns in their bond offerings. All interest is paid in ounces of gold and silver stored in your account free of charge. If your metal is gathering dust at home or costing storage fees in a vault, it is time to start putting your metal to work with Monetary Metals. Visit monetary-metals.com/Peter today to learn more. Now back to our show. The left-wing moment in global politics is over, so says the Wall Street Journal, blaming the collapse on, quote, weak economic growth and record immigration that has turned the masses against a socialist and globalist elite they no longer trust. As one analyst put it, quote, working-class people are just pissed off about immigration, about all the culture war stuff, about the weak economy. Indeed, rarely have people notice so quickly that communism does not work. And I'd like to thank the morons in the Biden administration, the European Union, and Justin Trudeau's clown show. The most dramatic inflection, of course, is Donald Trump's victory against the massed hordes of Mordor, legacy media, big business, the universities, and, of course, a weaponized federal government that managed to outdo the East Germans for patrolling citizen wrongthing. But it's been just as dramatic in Europe, where left-wing governments have been booted in Italy, Netherlands, Sweden, and Finland, while populists are surging in the rest, including Germany, Britain, France, and Spain. Recent videos have been rubbing my hands at what's to come in Europe, given their progressive elite has been even more incompetent than our homegrown variety. To illustrate why the U.S. is bouncing along a roughly 2% per capita real growth, perhaps 1% controlling for fake numbers, the euro area is at 0.5%, even with official numbers, and with similarly giant deficits dumping government money into the economic fire. Germany is actually shrinking at nearly 1% per year per capita. It's downright dour in Canada, which is importing so many migrants that incomes are shrinking by nearly 2% per year. What's driving the economic stagnation is the obscene bloat in Western governments since COVID. The spending, the inflation it caused, and the rate hikes to choke off that inflation. After all, it took trillions to bribe and scare voters into hiding on the couch while governments imposed totalitarian COVID lockdowns. Thing is, once COVID was over, true to form, the governments kept trillions for central planned utopias, including the particularly Soviet green energy transition. They did just as bad on immigration. In the old days, we had a consensus across the West that high-quality immigrants are welcome. So scientists, engineers, doctors, dentists, successful entrepreneurs, but not the dregs. The progressives broke that, throwing open the border to millions of unskilled or even criminal migrants from countries almost purposely chosen for their inability to culturally assimilate, particularly in Europe. Today we've got entire zones of places, like Amsterdam or Stockholm, that are all but unrecognizable to their own citizens. Presumably the left figured the migrants would vote left, that they would consume social services the left uses to pay their NGOs, and perhaps ginning up hatred over race, religion, who you sleep with, gives them an excuse to impose even more control over thought. But of course, they've now painted themselves in a corner where their only hope is censoring or jailing grandmothers who complain. There's no way to win an election when truth inevitably still seeps out. So what's next? Every country that ditches progressivism puts more pressure on the rest, because they show what's possible. So you can get jobs that pay, groceries you can afford, safe streets, and cities you actually recognize. So expect more progressive dominoes to fall in 25, starting with Canada and more of Europe, and expect the left, including their media, to scream even louder as they go down. A new study says shoplifting has soared 93% compared to pre-COVID, even as left-wing media swears up and down that locked-up toothbrushes at CVS are figments of your imagination. The numbers come from a new study by the National Retail Federation, who surveyed 164 retail brands, making up $1.5 trillion in sales, on what the industry calls shrinkage, and the rest of us call shoplifting, boosting, jackpacking, five-finger discounts. What's driving it, of course, is the effective legalization of shoplifting in blue cities and states including California and New York. To give a flavor, before Old Navy exited its San Francisco hometown, one store manager said he was getting hit 14 times a day. Indeed, in California, you got a ticket up to $950 stolen. Shoplifters would literally keep a running tally. In Philly, you'd also catch a fine, albeit at a less generous $150. In New York City, bail reform meant you walk free up to $1,000 stolen. The problem is these policies have generated a nationwide industry of stolen goods. Unlike the old days where junkies would sell for pennies on the dollar, these organized gangs ship right back into the supply chain, which makes it all much more profitable. Throw in millions of unskilled migrants who face deportation instead of jail time, and revolving door deportation at that, and you've got the supply and the demand. This has taken American shoplifting to a whole nother level. In California, they are boosting entire trains. New York has migrant shoplifting gangs with dozens of individuals. One gang in California had 117 shoplifters, which would make it a medium-sized business, according to the SBA. So as the profits go up, the gangs have gotten more violent. According to that Retail Federation study, 91% of retailers say that shoplifters are more violent and aggressive compared to pre-pandemic. 73% say they're getting more violent in the past year alone. Now, in theory, we have an FBI to go after interstate organized crime. Of course, in reality, the FBI does not have time for organized crime, or Jeffrey Epstein and P. Diddy for that matter, because they are busy chasing down grandmothers for protesting on January 6th. So what's next? Shoplifting raises prices because paying customers have to absorb the theft. But more important, it puts retailers out of business. In San Francisco, Portland, or Chicago, entire zones are now empty of commercial. At some point, people wonder why they're paying $5,000 a month to live in a boarded-up canyon infested with junkies. This can set off a so-called urban doom loop where first residents with jobs flee, then tax revenue plunges, and then the city cannot afford police or even street cleaning. You end up like Detroit or Baltimore. Now, thankfully, help is on the way, partly because even the bluest voters have finally had enough, so a recent California referendum recriminalized shoplifting, but most important because Trump actually intends to deport the hundreds of thousands of criminal migrants making up the gangs. Perhaps even New Yorkers can someday buy a toothbrush that is not locked in a cage. A word from our sponsor. If you run a business and want to get customers excited about your loyalty and rewards program, you can now implement Bitcoin rewards with Oshi Loyalty. You get all the perks of a full-featured loyalty and reward program with real Bitcoin rewards every time your customers shop, refer, and engage. Boost customer retention, loyalty, and lifetime value. And if you're looking for Bitcoin rewards when you shop, check out the dozens of companies in the Oshi marketplace at Oshi, that's OSHI.tech/shop. Start earning Bitcoin today. Now back to our show. With the collapse of both government censorship and the lapdog legacy media, we are about to enter a golden age for liberty. And we know this because it's happened before. So since Trump's win, it's felt like the entire world transformed, not only because Trump is now a battle-hardened firebrand, but because his win showed the elite could throw everything they have, impeachment, lawfare, 24/7 dictator talk, even multiple assassination attempts, yet every attack made Trump stronger. And combined with the post-election collapse in legacy media, it feels like the tide turned, akin to the fall of the Soviet Union, where Tuesday afternoon everybody had been a good Marxist, but Wednesday morning nobody ever believed that crap. In short, we're witnessing a spectacular collapse of the information control apparatus governments have built up over a century. Now, to be fair, this day was coming as soon as the internet hit the mainstream. It's easy to forget how excited early internet pioneers were about the democratization of information, which leads to the democratization of opinion, which leads to the democratization of governments controlled by the people, not the elites. So consider how it worked before the internet, when opinion was controlled by centralized media, like newspapers, radio, and television. All those technologies united production and opinion, meaning that it took a lot of money to have a voice. Whether it was printing presses and hundreds of delivery trucks, or radio and TV stations with transmission towers across the country, those expenses meant the press was a sitting duck for government intimidation. The censorship weapon of choice being licensing, so say the wrong thing and you are off the air. So media became government lapdog. The internet broke that because for the first time it separated distribution and content. You could have a loud voice with just a free blog. That gave us the first golden age of free speech on the internet as newspapers and TVs hemorrhaged readers to upstart websites and bloggers. So outfits like Instapundit, Drudge, the old Drudge, Huffington Post, or Think Progress gave voice to anti-establishment points of view you cannot intimidate with a broadcast license. Alas, voice and money were reunited with social media, starting with Facebook in 2004. Governments immediately went to work holding the companies hostage with regulatory or legal threats to force them to censor. For a moment, it looked like the internet would be perverted into a literal Big Brother. Thankfully, censorship was so ham-handed during COVID that people revolted, and Elon Musk saw the opportunity to restore free speech, with the other social media now forced to copy or die. This restored the golden age, this time on steroids given the viral nature of platforms like X. So we went from anti-establishment bloggers reaching thousands to viral posts that can reach tens of millions. So what's next? The last comparable moment in history was the Gutenberg printer in the 1500s. Like the internet, it was dangerous because it lowered the cost of communicating which allowed the spread and organization of dissent against governments. Now, back then, governments did all they could to censor, using licensing and even executing people for distributing the wrong pamphlets. It was bloody, but they ultimately failed spectacularly, forced to grant constitutional rights and political liberties that nobody could have imagined in 1400. This time, it's bloodless so far, and it's going to on a much faster timeline, so decades, not centuries. But if history is a guide, we are about to enter a golden age of liberty. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and go to petersanons.com for daily videos and in-depth articles with charts and all the gory details. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.